I would like to call to order the Oconee County Art and Historical Commission's June 10th, 2021 meeting. Our first item is the approval of the minutes for May 20th, 2021. I believe there was one note of members present. We need to make a change of. So if I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
And
Second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. First item for discussion is the ordinance, the 2021-11 ordinance, which relates to the preservation of historical markers.
Yes, ma'am. So I will share a little briefing with everyone. I sent you a little bit of backup information to look at. The County Council has passed ordinance 2021-11, establishing Chapter 40 of their Code of Ordinances to be entitled Cultural and Historical Preservation, and enacting Article 5, captioned Protection of Historical Markers. In that ordinance, they have provided a directive to our commission for assistance. And that assistance, and I'm just going to read directly off the ordinance. It says the Oconee County Arts and Historical Commission is hereby directed to develop a comprehensive list of historical memorials located on public property in Oconee County. This list, along with the statement of criteria used to determine applicable historical memorials, shall be presented to County Council for review and adoption as Appendix A hereto, and it shall then constitute the definitive list of historical markers for which this ordinance shall apply. So what they're asking us to do, and I've tried to make it as easy as possible and just put it into next steps. They would like for us to create the criteria for which a marker needs to fit in order to be on that list. That's step number one. The second one would be, once that criteria is set, we would then share that criteria with the public and a list of interest groups. And I will share with you our staff input here shortly on those. And we will allow 45 days for the public and those interest groups to respond back with any memorials that they feel should be included for consideration for that list. Once we get that information back, that'll be the August meeting at that point in time. We would then begin looking at staff's input plus anything that has come back to us from those stakeholders, and begin compiling a list based on what meets the criteria. And then once you feel comfortable with the list that we've put together, you would then make a motion and send it back to County Council. They would review it. Of course, they can make changes, add deletions if there's something they know about that we don't know. And then they would then label that as Appendix A to go along with this ordinance. The the public input that we will be seeking for the commission will all be in written form. So once we finish tonight, my goal is to have the criteria set, and we will reach out and tell them how to respond to us. We'll put a form together, and they will respond back, and then you'll see all that in writing. The Appendix A version of this ordinance will be done by a second ordinance, so that there will be a public hearing option at County Council. So there'll be two opportunities for the public, one in written form here to this commission, and then a public hearing for the second ordinance at County Council. Is that clear as mud so far? So that is the four basic steps that we have been asked to do. So to start with, we had a good bit of conversation about that criteria and how do we build that criteria. We looked at a number of different things and really based what we're going to show you off of the National Register's criteria, because that was already set in place. We weren't recreating the wheel. And so Leslie has put together a draft based on that and just pouring in Oconee County's piece of the puzzle so that it all matches together. We have shared that with Mr. Root, our county attorney, who has given us a thumbs up on our starting point. And so you guys will see that tonight. Have I sent that to you already? I don't think I did. You'll see that tonight. We'll read through it. Our goal would be to make some changes and try to approve that tonight if we can. If it gets too long and you want to wait, then it just pushes that back, 25 days back a little bit. So I'll just go ahead and share with you how we set this up. There's two basic criterias that the ordinance calls out specifically. The county can only control things that are in the unincorporated areas of the county, okay? So the historical memorial must be located within the unincorporated boundaries of Oconee County, not within the municipalities. So anything in the municipalities, if they want to protect that, then they would pass their own ordinance for their cities to do this process. So this would be just for the unincorporated areas of the county. And the memorial must be located on property that's publicly owned, operated, or controlled. So, all of your right-of-ways, things like parks or courthouses, all that's public property. All that is on property that's owned or controlled by public government. And so those things are applicable and can be utilized for this list. So that's your two base things that are in the ordinance. The one thing that we added was that it needed to be some sort of permanent placement. So that memorial should be something that's there for the purpose of staying there. Does that make sense? It's not a temporary piece. It should be something that's permanent in terms of a marker or a historical marker or a gravestone or whatever it turns out to be. So those are the two base criteria from the ordinance, as well as the one that kind of we threw in there, because I don't think that's specific in the ordinance, the permanent piece, but it does help us kind of control what's in there. After that, we listed, once those are met, then we wanted for those memorials to be evaluated for classification as historical. And we listed these 7 things. Is the memorial associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of history relevant to Oconee County? Is the memorial associated with the lives of persons significant to Oconee County's past? Does the memorial recognize an existing structure or site of a former structure that embodies distinctive architectural, artistic, or cultural values of Oconee County? Does the memorial recognize a site that has yielded or is likely to yield important information about the prehistory or history of Oconee County? Has the site been otherwise documented or recognized as possessing historical significance, even if a physical memorial or marker has not been placed there? Is the memorial a tombstone or other secondary gravesite marker in a publicly owned or operated cemetery? So you have to have those first 3 criteria, and then you got to have at least one of these. Does that make sense to you? Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to have those. You got to have those 3 up top: unincorporated area, on public property, a permanent site or memorial, and then it needs to fit into one of these 7 categories.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everyone? And so what we have done, Leslie put this together. I think she did a great job trying to look at the historical aspect of it and then giving us a starting point. So this is staff's recommendation to you as a starting point of what we would look at as criteria for ordinance 2021-11. So this is now up for you to discuss, to comment, to make edits, to make changes, to ask questions, all the above. And I'll be quiet and kind of let you have an opportunity to read that and think about that, and we're here when you're ready to start discussing. How's that?
Could you explain the last one, the tombstone, why that one is added if we already have, it must be on property that is publicly owned, operated, or controlled?
Can I answer that? Okay. So the ordinance does describe or define historical memorials, it says, is defined as any marker, monument, memorial, tombstone, plaque, or similar structure or site of significant political, cultural, military, or social history. So when I started drafting this, I was trying to incorporate all of those listed aspects to be sure that they were specifically addressed in some way. So there are cemeteries that are publicly owned. You could look at them as each tombstone being potentially historical. Many of them do have the secondary markers for things like Civil War soldiers. That is a secondary element that's subject to protection, I suppose, based on this ordinance. And so I had some debate about whether cemeteries should just be lumped in with sites, or if tombstones represent people in the first.
Well, that
There's a lot of
was my
overlap
question,
potentially.
was what, so if the tombstone is purchased by a family, then is that technically theirs, but it's in a public cemetery? That could
The
be a
definition
gray.
of public land is something that I think probably needs some additional clarification for this ordinance, because it can get very complicated, such as that.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's something we bring up and research, or if that's something the attorney has to.
Well, the attorney
But
would
it-
answer that question, and I can submit those back. I mean, my response to that, reading section C of that, it says this article applies only to property that's publicly owned, operated, or controlled. So if the cemetery is publicly owned, operated, or controlled, then that memorial would fit. That's my interpretation, but I will double check that.
And
I
it
think-
may be a case-by-case evaluation. That's my best guess.
I guess I read the ordinance after last month's meeting and watched it as council approved it. And my thoughts on the whole thing is I want to make sure that that whole publicly owned and operated and controlled, and I don't want us to get into a situation of trying to protect or preserve someone's personal property or land and what that could possibly entail. So,
Just to dovetail in there, I think there are gonna be a lot of markers that are on private property that people may find out are not subject to this ordinance, and that may make them unhappy. But that's why I think it's important to reiterate the base criteria and the fact that the county only has the jurisdiction that it has.
should it be then, I know you told us the 3 are a must, and they are ands, and then plus one of the 7. And I don't know if needs to be spelled out of,
Right, like in that process.
Like, can I comment as well? I hope everyone's taken the opportunity to read the ordinance. Okay, now specifically, and I'll be right up front, I think it's very premature to expect that within 45 days and by August that we will be able to discuss and/or vote on the ones to be approved. In my opinion, we are in the position to truthfully continue opening the can of worms. And according to scope, okay, section 1-102D, okay, I'm not going to read it to everyone, but there is no timeline mentioned in that section as to when we have a deadline. So my question is that something that would be ideal, or where did that number come from, or what is truthfully the indication that we are expected to abide by?
The only timeline that really I brought to this meeting was the public input section. So when we establish this criteria and we put it out to the public, that 45 days is the only timeline that I'm proposing to you that we stick to at this point. Once that 45 days is up, you may not be able to, at that meeting or the next meeting, have this list ready. But that's the only timeline that I'm bringing forward. The August meeting would be when you would start the compilation, and then when you finish it is when we'll send it back to council.
And as far as notifying the public, is that something that could be done in the form of what I call a legal notice in the newspaper, or how do we plan to address that?
So that's actually my next slide.
Okay.
Once we get to past the criteria, because we have a whole list of organizations that we will notify. It will be in the form of a letter that we will send to those interested groups. We will probably do something in the paper as well. We just didn't want to do just something in the paper and say, oh, we've notified the public.
Sure.
So we have a long list of people that we will send this to and hope that they would respond in that time manner.
Right, okay.
And it is a long list, and I'll share it with you on this next slide.
Question.
Yes, sir.
As I read through all that stuff, I felt like the intention was to prevent vandalism of these kinds of markers and et cetera. So why are we leaving markers off that might be on personal property if the owners of the property are willing to submit? Example, Daughters of the American Revolution. You know, they pay and put markers out in various places, and sometimes where they put them is still owned by somebody. I mean, but that marker was put because of the historical significance of that particular location. And to say that those aren't going to be protected under this seems a little short-sighted to me if the intent is to protect public historical information.
I think the initial response is that the county can only do a certain jurisdiction on public property.
But can there not be a clause put in that would say that people who have markers on personal property can submit them for approval to be included? I understand that the county doesn't have the authority to come in and say, we're going to protect that whether you want us to or not, but people could submit and say, it is on my private property, but I would like it included in this historical.
That's on my list for the attorney now.
Okay.
We'll ask that question.
I had a question about the unincorporated boundaries and it being in a municipality. Are we aware of any current, I guess my overall question was, in creating the list, that the county probably was aware of the ones that they currently own and operate. And I'm thinking of, are the monuments or markers that are in municipalities, is there any way where it's in a municipality, but the county owns the actual marker or structure? And as well as kind of tag along with that question is the historical markers that we've purchased or helped purchase or help get designated. Are those considered Oconee counties, or are those considered whoever the applicant was?
Offhand, I can tell you, you know, the municipality jurisdiction question, jumping out offhand is like the courthouse property, which does have a couple monuments on it. So I'm just assuming, and that may require further clarification from legal or whoever, but I would assume that that's public property within the county's jurisdiction. I would think the minute you're off of that property, you're back in the municipality. Now, those markers that we funded for years and years, I tend to think that those are funded for people, and therefore there's some kind of implication that you're relinquishing control. But again, I can't answer that definitively.
And this may be another parallel track of if it's a historical marker and it's in a municipality and they haven't taken time to put their own ordinance together, could they piggyback on this by saying, we want to submit this under the same?
I think that would tie back to that original question of,
Yeah,
you
but it's
know,
not only private
is
property,
there-
but municipal,
options.
municipalities are the same thing. Yeah, it seems like it would be wiser if we coordinate that effort across the county instead of having however many different municipalities there, having all the different regulations and different guidelines. Yeah, again, I understand that the county can't force that on them, but can they open it up and say, we're willing to protect that under the same law?
I'm curious to just see if that is possible, what kind of paperwork it will require, but,
I've added that to that same question,
Thank you.
Mr. Jones. What I'll do is I'll send these to Mr. Reed, get a response, and I'll give them back to you.
I'll say that I do know that most of the a lot of the markers that have been put out, over time, a lot of those groups that originally asked for them, and even if they funded them, sometimes just over time, they go unmanaged. They go kind of by the wayside, and ownership does become questionable. We get calls all the time, well, who's in charge of this marker, and who's allowed to go clean it up, who's allowed to, make sure that it's taken care of, and that does kind of become a tough question sometimes to answer, so.
It might be a similar scenario with grave sites,
Mhm.
that there are a lot of, we forgot there used to be a graveyard there, and, I remember in Greenville, they cut a road through, and in the process of cutting the road through, they cut into the bank and discovered that this was a cemetery, kind of thing, so. Yeah, the property was sitting in tax lien because nobody had paid the taxes, and so it wasn't technically public property.
Right. The same thing happens with cemeteries often. They just go forgotten and unmanaged, and then people sometimes don't even realize they own them for a while. So,
Speaking of cemeteries and the section, I think it is item B that Ernie brought up earlier, where it talks about defacing, removing, or altering without any permission. Cemeteries, would someone bow wreath, ribbons at Christmas time? Is that going to be a potential violation?
I don't see that as vandalism.
No, I wouldn't consider it vandalism either, but the way that they worded it was not.
I think you're looking at it case by case, because if whoever manages or controls that doesn't do it and someone else does, then, obviously they have the right to remove it.
I had just one other question, was in consolidating this list. I just assumed that there was already, at least the historical markers that we already had. If it was publicly owned, someone had.
So we do have a list that we have managed over the years. The process for what this ordinance asks us to do, however, is to set criteria first. Once that's done and we allow a number of folks to respond, we will share that list along with what everybody else submitted for us to create that secondary
Final
list. So
Okay.
we thought it was premature to start with a list instead of criteria, if that makes sense.
No, I think this ordinance covers more than what would be on that list.
It does.
It does, yep.
So I get it. I just wanted to make sure that there was not going completely back to square
There'll be a
square
starting
one,
point
but.
from the list standpoint, similar to what we did with you here with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
To start discussion.
that, just to reassure, there's multiple lists, and that, in terms of a draft starting point from someone like me, it's finding who manages those public lands, do they have a list of what's on their lands, and then pulling that all together, and adding whatever else the public input brings in, so.
Look,
It'll end up with a useful product, for sure.
I can only speak personally because I feel like I got somewhat on the train after it was already moving. Now, what's going through my mind right now is, and I know that it cannot be undone, but I think it was very premature of county council to approve this without more thorough consultation, and excuse me if that has already taken place, with the Arts and Historical Commission, as we are responsible for coming up with the list of the things that will be protected. So that's how I feel personally about it. In other words, we got the cart before the horse, in my opinion.
I understand, and I think that question was asked, early on, and they felt like that, the response that I got originally was, let's put this in place, and then you guys can do your work.
May I ask who gave you that reply?
That was just a general question and
Okay.
conversation. It wasn't anything that I did in writing or.
Okay, now I'm just curious, because I feel like that this is a large responsibility. I feel honestly that this came about because of certain monuments, okay? And as we all know right now, I mean, there has been history, nationwide civil unrest relating to monuments, statues, whatever we want to call them, okay? And where are we in South Carolina right now with the Heritage Act? I mean, what's legally right now the situation with that? I'm not saying that we need to necessarily drag our feet, but personally, I see no sense of urgency to come up with this. And that's just me personally. Thank you.
Is there already a list of the monuments already in the area? Leslie?
Like Phil said, there's several lists. And I think it's important to point out that, whereas I could have brought you a very easy list of markers, this encompasses far more than markers. And that's where it's become much more. I think, the fact that it does say tombstones, plaques, structures, or sites. Sites is the term that kind of threw me for a loop. I will say though, and I hope it's not too early to say this, but a few months back, the Planning Commission actually approached me as an in-house employee to start drafting a historical, cultural, artistic, whatever, asset inventory, which would check off one of their goals for the most recent comprehensive plan. I've actually been drafting that for months. It's very long. And so I think a lot of it's been in the works, but that's nothing that's been reviewed, approved, locked in, or anything. It's still just in draft form. So I would like to see these two things kind of dovetail and help each other along the way. I've thought maybe that list is something that is much more comprehensive than what this list will end up being. And so it may sort of be like a subset of that list.
It sounds like we're not supposed to be going out around the county and finding these places, are we?
I think that's what the public input section is so important about. We're asking people who would know to just tell
Okay,
us,
okay.
rather than finding them on our own.
All right, so we're not supposed to get in a bus and start going.
Good segue. Is there, to keep us on track, is there any other comments, questions, concerns about just the criteria section that we want to, for now? We're not saying we can't come back to it, but for now.
I'll say the top four there, those are directly paraphrased or tweaked from the National Register criteria. The last three there, the top four, the last two are ones that I kind of added from scratch. That for the second to last one addressing sites, because this doesn't necessarily say the site has to be marked. So I felt like that was important to address. And then, of course, the tombstone one made it a little complicated, so I felt like just addressing it independently was the best place to start. Just to explain how that
Hearing no other questions, can go on to the next slide, which you were, I think will help answer.
Yeah, and the one
your
note that I did make on here, to make a change on the criteria was to make it a little more clear that you had to meet those first three and one of these last six. I think I said 7 already. Last 6 items. So relevant parties to consult, as you can see, there's a lot of agencies there. So from a time standpoint, when we get this out in letter form and get it sent, there may be questions that come back that will require legal response. But we try to list all the agencies that are stakeholders for us, all of our partners that we deal with as a commission, and then you see all of the other state or local or partnered agencies, even the private, with Duke Energy in there because they have a lot of land that's along public-private way as well.
We didn't put down municipalities. And I only bring that up because Mr. Jones suggested, should we reach out to them and see, at least let them know what we're considering and where we are and their feedback, because I feel like they need to be aware that if we are having to protect something in their municipality, even if it's on something we own, they just need to be aware of that.
We can certainly add them to the list.
That's just a thought. I mean, everyone
Well, I
chip in.
had that conversation with Mr. Root, and the initial response was, we don't have jurisdiction within the cities. It would just be is there something that they know about that we don't type scenario. That goes back to that first question, Mr. Jones, we're going to ask again. Is there a way to compile or allow folks to ask to be in this ordinance that doesn't fall in the jurisdiction as it's stated now? I've made a note to add municipalities to that.
I would just, in the communication that goes to them, if they're aware of someone or party that might be of interest that they would want to pass this on to, I'm thinking if a municipality knows something that we don't know about something, I say that Clemson is on there, but it doesn't say specifically who in Clemson. And I'm just thinking if one person gets it in Clemson, perhaps they pass it on to someone else. And is that, that might be helpful if we could share that knowledge. I mean, of course, might make the list bigger that we have to evaluate against, but at least the more that know. I'm sorry.
We can make sure we have a note to share to all applicable departments within those agencies. And we will try and pick the one that's the best fit in terms of that.
Do you know who you're planning to reach out to at Clemson?
I haven't put that list together yet.
Okay, 2 names to consider: Pete Knudsen and Gerald Vandermeer. Gerald is semi-retired, but I know they've been involved with all the historical stuff in that area. They're the campus planners.
Can you email those to me?
I'm sorry?
Can you email those names to me?
Yeah, if you'll email me, ask it, because by the time I get home, I'll forget. Sorry. You can just say Pete and Gerald, I'll know which ones I'm talking about.
Is there, oh no, you have to. I know that it has Duke Energy. Would it be useful for the other,
Blue Ridge?
electrical or utility companies?
That's an idea. There may be things in their easements or,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just wondered.
So I'll just make a note of that, for the utilities, because that would also include Pioneer, water as well. And Florida.
And forgive me if, was this, would they be sending us? So when we create the list, are they just sending, are we envisioning them sending just a note, like a bulleted point? Or is there are we envisioning an application?
I'd like to see a form.
I'll have a form
Okay.
that they would, it'd be a respondent's form that they would list. And then there'll probably be a note, if you have more than one, please make a copy of it.
Okay.
Would we also send them a copy of the ordinance? I just want to,
Sure.
I don't know how y'all, was that normal practice or not?
Any other thoughts, comments, concerns on parties? Okay.
You might want to reach out to the DAR. Sons of the South, Daughters of the South.
I'll try to beef up that list of partners, that way.
My wife is on the DAR if you need, I don't know who
Oh,
to
if
contact, she
I've
wouldn't
got
be the contact,
contacts
but
there.
I can get you a name if you can't find one.
There, as far as the commission partners, is the Bertha Strickland Museum, is that one of the partners?
Yes,
as
Yeah,
well?
there it is.
Okay.
I would want to make sure there's some sort of avenue for anyone that we may have missed inadvertently to hear and be able to respond. I don't know if that's something we could put on a website page or, I don't know.
Maybe this is a silly question, but obviously, we're gonna have a list. There's gonna be stuff added in the future, and we're gonna discover we missed items. I'm assuming there'll be a process to add to this list over time.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's something we're.
so we don't have to get them all. We just need to do our due diligence.
It'd be in an ordinance.
If something is sent to council and something is turned in that, got missed, or was a site that was recently designated or somewhat, there'll be a process that, Mr. Rue will have to add that.
Leslie, does the National Register, you said the first four, I'm sorry to go back to this,
No,
but
it's
came from the National Registry, or National Register, so do they give helpful advice on how you evaluate that? What I'm thinking is where it says, what I'm envisioning is how this process is going to actually play out. And these forms come in and they say that, yeah, they have 1 and 2, and then they want to choose a category that says of significance to the county. whether that was a person, a place, and that's significant. If that's the only list of criteria, is that going to become a very gray area unless they,
Can. Yeah, I can certainly look into that some more to find out if they do have a more formal process, if it involves a committee or something like that. I think it can certainly get very broad and sensitive. My whole job is to sort of be a decision maker about what's historically important or not, and that can be touchy. So it usually helps to have more people's opinions involved so that you can, a diversity of input, so that you could say, well, it might have been less important in my view, but more important now that you've spoken up. And then just figuring out, does it really, is it significant to a lot of people or just, one family or not kind of thing.
didn't know if it's something where they need to show a documentation or some type of, or do we not even go down that rabbit hole yet, but leave a gray space where, I don't know if we can add a process that says to make a case, or a case for an
Right.
appeal, or
Provide some supporting.
but then I think of it being very process-oriented and laborious of something that is,
Yeah. It could be.
but this is something that we're supposed to be protecting, which comes at a cost of resources too. So we want to make sure that have a good, solid list. I don't know the proper way to phrase what I'm asking, other than,
I envision that you're gonna have something along this list that, some of you may deem significant, some of you may not. You may have items on this list that none of us think are significant, except for who turns it in. That will all be noted. So the list that goes to county council, if there's something on there that was presented that we didn't include, they're gonna see that. And if there's, and there'll be another public hearing for that opportunity as well. So there'll be two opportunities for that list to be included. Does that make sense? So,
Sorry.
go ahead. So what goes to county council will be everything that's turned in, they're gonna see it's included, or it was turned in and not included, if we have such a list.
For that purpose and that concern, I think that's one reason I like the idea of the county ultimately having a very big historical, artistic, cultural asset inventory, where maybe the criteria are maybe a little broader, or there's more room and time for evaluation there. This ordinance, I think, those base criteria really automatically just help you make quicker decisions, and weed some things out. Unless, of course, we do find that there's more loophole room than what we know now. So that's kind of where, because I immediately got like overwhelmed with it too.
And I think we all did, because,
Yeah.
the base criteria, unincorporated areas on public property, well, that rules out a lot of monuments that are in the
Yeah.
county. But the response was, that's our only jurisdiction, and that's all that we can do. So once we go back and clarify that information, we'll know kind of what.
and you're right, it's, I think where I'm getting hung up is what we don't know and what's going to show up on that form, and then what? But, I hear
Does
what
the
you're saying.
commission have, is it within their purview to either bring in or go out to consult other people, in the field and say, well, I've never heard of this site, but have you?
Oh,
Or-
sure. Yeah, if we get things back during your review process, you may want to bring someone, you may have, one meeting may be for a presentation, for you to hear why was that presented as something to be considered. Absolutely. And that kind of goes into your time, you want to make sure that you review every application and every potential site. or monument or memorial.
Right, because it may become, I mean, honestly, something may be recommended that we feel is worthwhile, then truthfully is for lack of a better term, a title search truthfully going to be done to guarantee, I mean, that it is within the guidelines. I mean, because some property you really can't tell.
That's a concern I shared, was there will be some amount of legwork, for someone somewhere to resolve issues of, is it public or private property?
Well,
Is it
right,
on
and
the
that,
right
I
of way?
mean, that's a legal concern.
And we kind of discussed that too. There's some parts of this where it may be resolved, questions and details may be resolved by people further down the line, arresting officers, prosecution, that kind of thing.
But the consultation of private property or public property, we have the folks in this building that can help determine those things.
Right.
If something comes up that's in question. So those resources will be available to answer that specific question.
Any other comments? So, did you have another slide after the parties?
No. No. All I have is your parties and your criteria. We have a couple of legal questions before we can set that criteria. I will ask those. I don't want us to vote on something that we not have the complete answers on. So I will send that to legal review, and we'll get that back to you. And then at the June meeting, we will then take those answers and then try to pass the criteria set, and we'll update the consultation list. We'll update all the input today, and we'll have both of those ready for the June meeting, so that if it passes at that point, then we'll start the process then.
And those are those other issues to consider that were
Yeah, so
on the draft?
I have for legal review, can a private citizen or municipality ask for a memorial on private property to be included? I also have to clarify the base criteria as well as one of the additional, and then I have the consultation to add the municipalities, the utilities, Blue Ridge Electric, Pioneer Water, Fort Hill Natural Gas, Tomasi DAR, I don't think I'm missing.
Asking about
Yeah, those are internal things that people, so you got this sheet here, so on the bottom of that, other issues to consider, these were some internal things that we were also working through. Defining public land, I think Suzette, that kind of
Yeah.
was with you. How will these agencies be informed, involved? Large historical sites with many physical elements. So those are all things that we will now give legal review to respond to back before we set all this.
Yeah, we
Kind of clear that up.
I do
pretty
want-
covered them, but we pretty much covered all these, but I did read the large historical sites, and I'm glad you put that on there, because I don't think reading the ordinance, I realized it until that example was provided, which is basically when we're talking about sites, what if it is a park? And which elements, or is it all of the elements? And then how do you inventory that, or tag that, or keep up with that? Is it all of that or individual? And that's not really clear in the ordinance, but could be.
Right, we don't want someone being arrested climbing on the monkey bars.
I don't know.
Exactly.
Good point.
I do want to be sure I think that was a very good question about like the tombstone ownership. I want to make sure we get some help answering that. I've just been in that position recently, and I'm like, well, it is in the cemetery, but you do pay for that separately. There's some question there, so I'll explore that a little too.
Well, and also I was curious, so you have tombstones, gravestones, but what if it's in like a mausoleum type of thing? I don't know all the details, but I know that it's tricky. And-
No, not offhand, but cemetery ownership is just very odd. So if there's someone that knows more about that than me.
I do have that note, cemetery markers, public land.
Is there anything else that staff needs us to do regarding this during this time?
I don't think, if you're, if you feel like we're going down the right road with the criteria, that's kind of what we're looking for. We obviously want to get a couple of things answered before we ask you to vote on that. But it sounds like what Leslie's put together is we're going down the right path.
I will say that we may not all agree with what was presented in the ordinance for us to do, but it has been directed, and we will take our directive and create the criteria and a list and the best process that we can. Any further comments on this item? Then I will move on to our next one, which is the mural promotion project.
Just an update for you. I showed you the website last time. The ones that were off, we've added those. I think there was a couple that we didn't have on the website at the last meeting. Those have all been added. We also gave credit for the photography at the very top of that page. The website, the web post company has sent us just yesterday the QR codes that are specific for each mural. We tested all those today, and everything works. So our next step is we will send those to the printer and start working on the round that you guys picked last meeting and putting those QR codes together. And then once those come in, we'll be ready to go out, and those who are willing, we will be able to put those on those properties. Or if we don't want it on the building, we can put it on the sidewalk.
How
So that's
long
kind of-
before that will be done, Phil?
I'm sorry?
How long before that will take place?
I hate to put a timeline on it because I'm in the middle of the busiest
Yeah,
art
okay.
season ever.
End of year.
So,
More than a month and less than 20 years.
it could be within a month.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the QR codes were done, we sent an email to request it and it came back the next day. So, I mean, that was quick. The printer is just waiting on me now I wanted to verify them, and that was what they asked us to do. So we had Shonda tested every one of them today and made sure they went to the right spot on the website. So
Okay.
when you clicked on one, it went to the American flag, or it went to the B, or it went to the Last Supper. I mean, all those were checked today. And now I will work with the printer, send them a list. It won't take them long to print them. And then we may have to do a subsequent, I have not made it around to every property. I just haven't been able to escape my office to do that. So we may have to do a second printing of a couple of sidewalk pieces. So I don't think you're a month away from having all those done. Maybe 6 weeks.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Any questions about that project? It's going well. I'll try to pull, I'll pull the data and see how many people have clicked on that, because we track that too for the next meeting.
Will
Is-
we,
One question. Is this something that's been discussed at the county meetings? Are they aware of this, of the mural project? Has this been brought up at the county council?
Um,
Because I think it would be a good thing. I think it's a very positive thing, and
Yeah.
think
We would need to just add that as an update.
could somebody from our group talk about it at the meeting?
Let me get this, let me get the QR codes up first, and then we can schedule that.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay. The next item is the FY22 planning. And I guess this is a carryover from where we were last month of if there's ideas on projects and spending our funds for next year. I believe the only project that we had was printing of the calendars. And then, of course, I think they mentioned that there might be a historical marker application coming through. Dan mentioned that,
Heard rumblings.
but not seen anything yet. So that might be something that we have to consider. And then we were opening it up for ideas. I think we thought we should, well, there was talk of keeping some funds out in case we needed to purchase more markers for the QR code signs. Thoughts? Are we at a point where we want to talk about planning? Defer?
With the plans that we already have as far as the calendar and stuff, how does that impact what's remaining in funds versus what we've already tentatively said we wanted to do?
For next year,
Yeah.
I think it was,
I'll have to update that quote on the calendars.
That's fine. We're very early in the year. As long
I
as
think
don't
we
wait
had
till
the
December.
calendar at 2.5, the marker at 3. We talked about sponsoring a social media night or
Yep.
class.
Yep.
Something at Jazz on the Alley to promote the mural project. Were all just topics that we talked about, but that's as far as we really got. The only dollar amounts I had was the, so if we had to do, if that marker application came through that, and we did the calendars, not saying we have to, but, so that would be 5.5, and our budget was, we're thinking 7,500, but won't know until
June 22nd.
June 20th.
So they'll have their third reading June 22nd. That'll be set. So you'll know for sure at the June meeting. And then we'll just need to update the
Keep
quote on
saying
the
the
calendar.
June meeting, we're in the June meeting.
I'm sorry, July meeting.
Okay.
No problem. Just want to make sure I'm not in the wrong time zone or something.
July meeting.
I feel like we've got a good start for the year, and we don't have to, earmark every dollar at this point. I think we got a good start for the year. Let's focus on those items and see if something pops up that we feel like going through. I feel like the plan we've got is good to go for now. That's my thoughts.
My only comment would be to, if you know of, when we talk about the partners, if we know or hear of any projects or of something that you feel like might be a worthy item, please bring it to the table or to Phil to put on the agenda so that we can discuss it and add it as a possible item. I feel we can't help and provide what we don't know. So if we definitely hear something, I definitely want to jump on that and bring it up for consideration. I personally haven't, but don't let that stop us from trying to reach out and see if there's a need or another project that we can align ourselves.
Along that line, I did ask my wife if the DAR was trying to do anything in the county this year. She's not sure, but she's gonna get back with me and see if there's anything there. That's the one activity we're looking at, so.
Then I think we can just add that again to next month's agenda.
Planning,
Mhm.
okay?
And are there any other items, comments? The next meeting will be July 8th, and that will be at 6 PM here.
FYI, I will be out of town.
Okay. So knowing that we already have one member who will not be present, it's important if we can't, if you know that you're not going to be here, let us know, and we don't have a quorum. With that, can I get a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
And a second?
I second it.
Second. All in favor? All right.